Ah, here he is.
Morning.
How are you? Whether you would be sequestered.
And you are live.
Oh, we're live now. Okay.
I have a amendment here, nine, so.
I don't think we'll be here. I hope.
So we are live now. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. A little later, 8:15. I'm Molly Burke, Chair of the House Sexual Harassment Prevention Panel. It's the Friday, the 28th of March, and we are here to vote on a small change that was made in our procedures. And now I'm going to turn it over to our attorney, Maggie Farron.
Okay, so thank you, everyone. As we discussed last week, the ethics panel is making a couple of changes to their procedures, one of which will allow them to share information with this panel and the House Discrimination Prevention Panel to inform investigations that this panel does and that the discrimination panel does. And that was the change that this panel wanted to make to this panel's procedures. There were some other things in the changes to, there are extra copies here. There are some other changes in the ethics panel's procedures that weren't deemed appropriate by this panel to change for this panel's rules. And so what I did was on page 8 of 9, you'll see in the highlighted text, Rule 20E contains the general provision, Rule 20 contains the general mandates for maintaining confidentiality. And then I added subsection E, which says, notwithstanding subsections A through D of this rule, the panel may disclose information and records received under these procedures to members or staff of the House Ethics Panel or the members or staff of the House Discrimination Prevention Panel to inform an investigation by either panel, provided that members or staff agree to maintain the confidentiality of the information or records provided. And that mirrors the language of that particular change in the ethics panel's procedures. And you'll note that it is permissive and not mandatory. So this panel could get an inquiry from any of those other panels and decide on a case-by-case basis that it's not appropriate to speak to either panel or disclose, but it does allow for that exchange of information. And then the only other thing I changed is on the last page, and it's just a little housekeeping cleanup where it states that the Office of Human Resources and the Office of Legislative Information Technology shall maintain the records of this panel. It used to say the Office of Legislative Counsel, but since Damien is out of the biz and we're maintaining these records, I think this just cleans it up and avoids any public records questions later on that, you might have to poke around and see what they have as well. That was just something that Damien suggested. So these are the changes.
Mm-hmm. So are we going to need to go on these? Is that what we would need to do right now?
Yeah.
Or any discussion on this?
Good with it. Good. I need to accept the changes.
I think I'm good too, but could you give me an example of when it would be appropriate? You said that we can decide not to share. When might we decide to share? What kind of issue?
Well, I think it's hard to say. And the thing that I was thinking of before that I mentioned or Representative Hedrick was this panel had discussed when Representative Lalonde was here, adding some language to their procedural changes that would ensure that any public statement issued by the ethics panel doesn't include a reference to consulting or talking with this panel. And I'd imagined in my head, well, what if this panel makes this change today, saying we can talk to them, but they don't make a change that reflects a prohibition on disclosing any conversation with this panel to the public for another 2 months. If they were to, in the interim, under some rule that didn't reflect what this panel was looking for in terms of saying you can't say to the public that you talked to the sexual harassment prevention panel. If they asked in the meantime, do you have any information about X and Y respondent? This panel would be perfectly within its rights to say, we're not really comfortable with the procedural protections in your rules yet, so we decline.
Okay.
And I mean, I'm having trouble off the top of my head thinking what would be appropriate and what wouldn't beyond that. It's just, I like how there's nothing mandatory in this rule. There's no requirement to disclose.
To be honest, I wish it wasn't in here at all, but everyone seems to be wanting this in here. So I'm okay with it, but with skepticism.
I can conceive of a scenario where a complaint comes to this panel first. And we follow our procedures and we learn of behavior that is egregious enough to want to involve another panel. I can see that happening.
That's what I was thinking.
Okay.
Yeah.
That it's not a single incident, or as you do your investigation, you find out this is widespread, involves some ethical violations or discrimination and violation, as well as
Right.
this, as you go through your investigation, and you might want to communicate with one of the other panels, or in their investigation of whatever is they discover something that relates to us, and they would like to be able to communicate to us.
I understand that. Yeah. So,
And we would be like hamstrung to like knowing and being like, we can't say anything. That may help resolve the situation.
the nature of what we deal with is so sensitive that I really think we need to be very, very careful about not letting it get out unnecessarily.
Right.
Absolutely.
I think we
And
all
you think
are.
one instance that was discussed would be if the ethics panel had a case in front of it and wanted to know whether a respondent had been subject to an investigation or a complaint by another panel, because that might indicate a greater severity if it's repeated behavior. And if the panels can't speak to one another, I mean, you could have the same person having been investigated by all three panels, but each panel is treating any allegation as a first offense.
Yeah. Okay.
Does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you. I don't mean to slow us down.
That we stop this. Great. I'm sorry about that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Thank you, panel, and I appreciate everybody coming here multiple times at 8 o'clock in the morning, and a little later today, to conduct our business, important business.
Not
And I think we can, do we want to, think we're going to end the meeting now?